we have some apologies. Rick and Debbie, please the apologies. And the motion. All in favour? Aye. Any further conflict?
Excuse me, Chair, just before we move on, I do have a number of notices for today. The first of which is that if I could just advise the committee that the council made a further submission on the freshwater reforms on the issue of swimmability, and the timetable precluded us bringing it to this committee. It was approved by the council last week, and a copy of that has either been tabled or will be tabled during the meeting today of that submission. So that is provided. The second thing to advise the committee is that last week the council resolved to join with the Environmental Defence Society and Fish and Game New Zealand to seek an Environment Court declaration in relation to the Rural Taniwha Water Storage Scheme consents, and at the same time requested that staff bring advice back to this committee on the implementation issues around Plan Change 6, particularly in relation to the scheme. And we will be bringing advice back to this table around the future of Plan Change 6, all of which falls out of the Rural Taniwha Water Storage Scheme review. Very conscious of the fact that we haven't briefed the committee on the review aspects that relate to RMA planning, and that will come forward as a bit of a package. The final thing, Chair, is just to advise the committee that on the 29th of June, Local Government New Zealand is holding a webinar, and we'll fire out the details on that, which is just a 1 hour briefing on the Resource Legislation Amendment Act. This is the changes to the RMA principally, and we will be providing a briefing to the committee from Matt Conway of Simpson Grierson, who is our principal RMA lawyer. He has offered to, at no cost to the council, provide a briefing on those changes to legislation, so we will be doing that at the next RPC meeting. Thank you, Chair.
James, could you just explain for us really briefly what was the nature of the further submission on swimmability?
There was no material change to the position. It was minor points of clarification, and it arose because the Ministry for the Environment commissioned some work from NIWA and I think Cawthron Institute very late in the piece, and they provided that publicly too late for people to submit on it. And so there were some minor points around, particularly around measurement and definition, but no substantive change to our position around swimmability. So we will circulate that, and if you've got any questions about the nature of it, please come back to us. Chair, I think reading through these, all of them are either dealt with on the agenda today or have been actioned, so I'll just take it by exception if committee members have Liz does have a comment to make in relation to.
Sorry, and first of all, apologies to James because I haven't had a chance to update him, but it's around Item 9, the Water Conservation Order application. We've just received a letter into Council from the Chair of the Special Tribunal, Richard Fowler, acknowledging receipt of our submission and also advising that they intend to establish a pre-hearing meeting. And as our submission is largely around process, they're going to direct that be discussed at the pre-hearing meeting. They'll advise us when there's a date and location for that pre-hearing. Yep. Oh, thanks. There's copies of the letter. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you. Do you want to discuss this further?
No, it's really just to advise you, really,
Okay.
that they've received our submission. They'll intend that it will be discussed with us as part of a pre-hearing, and basically they haven't set any date yet for that.
So someone move the recommendation, please, that the Regional Planning Committee receives the following follow-up items from the previous meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Wilson and Bevan. All in favour? Are there any items of business people would like to flag that are not on the agenda? Councillor Bevan. Sorry? Hearings committee. Okay. Any further? Thank you. Decision items. Item number 6, framework for outstanding water bodies in Hawke's Bay. We've had a very comprehensive discussion this morning on things. So we called it Gavin, you and hopefully we can deal with this in 10 minutes.
Chair, just before Belinda starts, for Machu and Neil's benefit, as they weren't with us this morning, just advise you that the prevailing view among attendees was that option 4 was the preferred option to proceed with.
Well, okay, I don't know, do we just want to go over the outstanding water bodies proposal and the preferred option 4, or discuss it, or go straight into questions? Yeah.
I would assume that everyone's read things, so if you've got any questions, Neil or Machu.
Okay, well, maybe we'll just go straight to Neil. Do you? Yeah.
Got the choices up there, you need to fill them in.
Okay, so if I can attempt to make a motion, Chair.
More than welcome.
That 2.2 is obviously support as option 4. What?
That's the recommendation.
Straight to recommendation. Yeah. No.
It's been
Supports option 4 as the preferred approach to the preparation of the plan change to assess blah 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 outstanding water bodies in Hawke's Bay. This option includes coastal areas. And 2.3 agrees that for the purposes of drafting the outstanding water body plan change, and then straight into 2.3.1, delete the word either. Agrees 2.4,
You want to take
2.3.2, that's
deleted?
That's deleted. And then 2.4. That's okay. And 2.5 and 2.6. No, 2.6 all okay. Yeah. Deleting? Deleting 2.6.
Where we've got water / fresh water, which do we have in there?
Water.
So take out fresh water.
And I'd second that motion.
So you could close up the 231, just rewrite the plan, change the values, I think.
Alright, so what do you want to take out? Just take the 2.3 out, 3.1.
Just make it all one sentence. All one backspace. That's it.
And delete fresh water from the grey.
Yeah.
And the ore.
Obviously.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry, just while Judy's doing that, just to place on the table there, I'll need to leave at 2:45 this afternoon if the meeting is concluded.
You'll be the only one here.
And deleting 2.6, Judy.
Deleting 2.6.
So we're keeping 2.5 back to the neighbours, it's thing. Yep.
Yeah, that's okay.
So you've moved it?
Yep.
And,
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Any questions? Do you want to speak to your motion?
No, I'm fine.
Speak to it. All in favour? Thank you. Next item, please. Thank you, Belinda. Very good.
Thank you, Chair. This one's for me. So this is an information item for for the committee. The councillors have already received a copy of this via the Environment Services Committee. This is really contextual information for the committee with respect to the wider operating environment in which we're working. The first of which is a biannual survey conducted by Lincoln University around public perceptions of the state of the New Zealand environment. And if I could just draw to the committee's attention the fact that we've been seeing over the 16 years that this survey has been run, a continuing increase in the level of public interest and concern around the management of natural resources. The state of fresh water is at the top of the list in terms of the community's concerns. The impacts of farming in particular have increased in the public's consciousness. And I think it's also fair to say that we're seeing more interest in the marine environment as well, and also in the management of our soils. We are seeing an increase in the level of participation in resource management, environmental management decision making, and by way of an example, participation in environment organisations has gone to 20% of respondents have said that they've participated in some environmental organisation in the last year. So that's pretty high, and the survey also differentiated between Māori New Zealanders and Pākehā, and on that score, Māori indicated a stronger level of concern about the state of environment and were more likely to be participating in environmental management decision making and actions to address their concerns there. So
Can we respond to point 8 that we have a more negative perception?
So look, that's just straight from the report that the data suggested that, and when I say negative perception, I'd say it's fair to say that Māori are generally more concerned about the state of environment on average, statistically, than Pākehā New Zealanders.
That would be a better expression.
Point taken, Chair. And look, so happy to take any questions on that. But before we do, perhaps I'll just mention the OECD Environmental Performance Review. So once every 10 years, New Zealand is reviewed by the OECD for its environmental policies and our environmental management system. This review was overseen by a former Environment Minister, Simon Upton, and I think it's just worth noting that the work that we have going on in this council is highly consistent with the recommendations of the OECD, particularly with respect to the focus on water management, our embracing of collaborative and participatory decision making, the involvement of tangata whenua in the management of natural resources, and also our focus in the transport area around public transport, low emissions, and in particular also the confluence between climate change, risk reduction through more resilient landscapes and what that delivers by way of better water quality and better biodiversity. So right across the functions of this council, the things that this committee is overseeing, very much consistent with what the OECD is recommending as best practice. And I think this committee can take some comfort that while we have significant challenges ahead of us, much of what we are trying to do is fairly cutting edge at the global scale, and we're applying really the best tools and best practices and processes to address these very challenging issues. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, this might be totally out of order. Tell me if it is. But given the American government's decision to withdraw from the Paris agreements on climate change mitigation, should this committee write to the American embassy and express its concern? Send a tweet.
Chair, perhaps I could comment. This committee does have statutory responsibility for the kaitiakitanga of this region's natural resources. This is the preeminent body for the region's natural resource management. And so if there are issues that affect the health and well-being of the natural resources of this region, I think this is the appropriate body to be representing those in whatever fora that you feel is appropriate.
Can't hear you, Tara.
Best conduit would possibly be to our government for them to send the concerns on.
I don't know. What would you think, James?
I'd be very happy to have a letter drafted, perhaps to the Minister of Climate Change Issues, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, and also to the Ambassador for the United States on behalf of the committee.
Okay, all in favour?
Has anybody seen a response from this government to
I haven't seen anything in the press. What has New Zealand said about this?
As I understand it, the Minister for Climate Change Issues has expressed her disappointment and has said that the New Zealand government does not agree with the course of action and that we are like-minded with most other countries of the world, that the Paris Accord is a necessary, essential global commitment that New Zealand will be staying with.
Did I move the report be received as well? Yeah, thanks.
I just wanted to draw this committee's attention to number 24 on page 54, where the OECD is critical of regional councils for being, quote, slow to put the freshwater management policy into action. And obviously that incorporates land management very much. And I think it's pretty important to note that I think the council has expressed its intent to move in that direction, and we certainly need to resource more action in the area of land management if we want to have good water.
I'll ask Mr. Ide to talk to this one.
Good afternoon, committee members. So this is our regular, every 2 months we report on our statutory advocacy activities. This particular edition of the Statutory Advocacy Project update also features a work in progress around an inventory of all the applications that the Crown and/or High Court has recently received in relation to customary marine activity recognition under the Marine and Coastal Area or Takatai Moana Act. I say it's a work in progress because even at this point in time, the Crown and High Court do not have a good grasp of all the applications that have come in through their door in the last, what's been probably 6 to 8 weeks. So until they have a firmer grasp of what the numbers are and applicant names are, those applications as far as they relate to the Hawke's Bay region for us remains still a bit of a moving feast. The best I have been able to do and my team at this point in time is present to you the table that's set out in attachment 1 to this paper. What that indicates is at this point in time we are potentially experiencing about almost 30 applications for customary marine title or customary activities being recognised in some parts of the Hawke's Bay region. Some of these applications have been lodged several years ago, such as those by Mangahuru Tangatu Trust and Ngāti Pahawera. For some time now we've also had statutory update reports on the application previously lodged by Ronga Mawahine around the Mahia Peninsula area. This presents a much fuller list of applications. The ones that, hopefully you've got coloured printouts, the ones that are in orange from about ID number 18 through to 27 are ones that we have been informed of by the Crown, but only in terms of the applicant name. We have no further details at this point in time as to what they've applied for, nor where have they, nor where have the applications been made. Our intention is when we have a firmer handle on the applications as they relate to Hawke's Bay, we will go about attempting to map the areas, and our online resource that's known as Pātaka would be the place where we represent those customary marine title applications, not only for our own reference but general public reference as well.
A question from total ignorance here. What is generally the content of one of these applications? What is it seeking or doing or?
I'll have a go. There,
But I think what might be helpful is if one of our groups came in and did a little bit of a short presentation in terms of what this is about, because Ngāti Pārawera, we are the only iwi group that's gone through the whole process, and we've got what happens is you submit your evidence and you apply for customary marine title, and that covers the area up to 12 nautical miles. You can get some wahi tapu protection as well, and you can get some cultural protective things as well. So those are, and the reason that Pārawera has gone for it is we want to protect our fisheries, and we want to protect our interests along our coast in particular. What it does is, if you have customary marine title, you can prevent resource management applications in regard to certain activities. So that's one of the reasons we're progressing that. We have had the recommendation from that. What they do is they have a independent assessor, which tends to be a high court judge or something like that. You present all your information, he makes his recommendations to the Crown, and then the Crown makes their decision. And so we have got a decision, and we are accepting what the Crown has offered, but we're also taking them to the High Court for what they haven't given us. So
all of these ones that refer to the 12 nautical mile limit, is that conferring like fishing rights, or?
no, it's got nothing to do with fish.
No.
It's got to do, well, it's to do with management of what goes on the coastal bed. Might be oil exploration, sand extraction, building of piers, you name it, that kind of stuff.
and just further to that, it can also recognise that some customary activities, such as, what's an example? Shellfish gathering or seaweed, driftwood collection can occur despite whatever other rules and regulations may otherwise apply to that sort of activity. Why these why these applications are important today is because as soon as an application is made, either to the Crown directly or the High Court, there is a legal obligation on the Council and its Resource Consent Authority role to refer any resource consent applicants back out the door and tell them to go and liaise with the marine and coastal area applicant.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I just pursue this a little further, and whether Mr. Palmer and yourself, Gavin, could just give us a perspective on the implications for fisheries and protection thereof within the 12-mile limit. And I'm thinking of the arena example in Tauranga. Are there any implications for the marine environment, fishery?
I think the Chair was right that none of these instruments, the customary marine titles or customary activities, give any extra entitlements or ability to restrict the fisheries or the taking of fish. So that's kind of set aside. In terms of habitat management, well, yeah, I think these customary marine titles may help with the habitat management part of the equation.
Does that cover undersized crayfish?
So I think the short answer is there's an indirect relationship, and as we clarify our own legal jurisdiction with respect to fishing activity and its impact on habitat, there's then a flow on into the decision rights of tangata whenua that have been recognised under the statute. So there may well be, in the fullness of time, as this is all given effect to, a greater say for tangata whenua with respect to those fishing practices. That's once we've clarified that we do have jurisdiction in that regard.
Just following up on Mr. Mohi's observation, does it confer any, do customary rights confer any jurisdiction or capability to catch undersized crayfish, for example?
That's not my understanding, no.
It's got
General compliance required for nationwide, if you like, fishing quota and limits.
It's got nothing to do with fish, really.
Well, don't customary rights give rights to take?
Takatai Moana, well, the Takatai Moana thing relates mainly to the seabed in the between high and mean tide out to what it relates more to activities. Well, that's all fishes are covered under other different acts. Yeah. And if I yeah.
Which takes us back to the Bay of Plenty court case at the moment, because the seabed and disturbance of the seabed may have an adverse impact on fisheries recruitment and spawning habitat, etc.
So it's more about the habitat, protecting the seabed.
So, Mr. Chairman, when there's two groups claiming the same, do that judge make the judgment on that case? There's two iwi groups claiming the same area. You said a judge.
Well, if what you have to prove is you have to prove that you have exclusive utilisation of that area. You have to, as a tangata whenua, you have to. So if there are any conflicting things, those groups have to sort that out before. Otherwise, it's a lose-lose situation. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just offering that if you want a presentation, we can bring one of our technical people here to talk about what our application is about.
I would appreciate that, Chair.
Okay, so someone move the report, please.
I've got a further question.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Not related to the fisheries question, but further on the statutory update, more around the Hastings District Council plan changes that they're putting through. Looking at specifically the one you got on map reference 3, which is on page 63. In the current situation, there's an item there previously. Is it previously? Has that been dealt with already, or is that just something that you've advised us of previously and it's still ongoing?
Previously advised you of some activities and it's ongoing. It's just there for background context.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, I was just going to say it seems strange to me that the Hastings District Council is still looking, still going through the process of arguing that they're allowed to discharge stormwater over the unconfined aquifer. Shake my head at that one.
Okay. So any further questions on that? Someone move the report be received, please. Thank you. Seconder. Thank you. Bailey, Wilson. All in favour. Cheers. Item 9.
So this is another one of our regular updates that we present to you every 2 months. If I take you to things of particular note, I suppose in the table set out in attachment 1, The oil and gas regulation line item there, you'll be aware that we had a workshop this morning. We got some good clarification of where the committee would like the project to evolve. So we move on with that one. Tank plan change stuff, it's continuing to be a work in progress, and there's a couple of upcoming tank group meeting dates there for your diaries if you haven't already got them in there. Outstanding freshwater bodies plan changes refers to a separate item in today's agenda. You've discussed that and made some recommendations on that already, so that's noted.
Gavin, I might just leap in on Mohaka. I was just telling Tanya in the break that unfortunately the senior planner Shane Lambert, who was working on the on the Mohaka plan change, and who was diverted off onto the review of Royal Taniwha Water Storage Scheme, resigned and has gone to Napier City Council just at the conclusion of the RWSS review, at the point we were about to reignite Mohaka. So Gavin is presently recruiting a replacement for Shane, and when that replacement is in place, their very first task will be on resurrecting the Mohaka plan change, and we hope to make that make some significant progress in the second half of this year.
Very good. Sad to see Shane go.
There's a lot of content, text in against the resource management plan effectiveness reporting line. I will come back to that because that probably warrants a bit more discussion than others. The other point that I want to take you to is on page 72, and like Mr. Palmer alluded to earlier in the meeting, the Council has considered and lodged a further submission on the government's clean water proposals. This is the text that for some reason still appears in yellow highlight there. So I just want to acknowledge that time has moved on that one, and the committee has already been briefed about that particular circumstance by James earlier this afternoon. So, turning back to the Regional Resource Management Plan Effectiveness Reporting update. In the annual plan, there is the milestone which says in this current financial year, i.e. by 30th of June 2017, we have to prepare a report on the effectiveness of the Regional Resource Management Plan, where parts of those plans haven't otherwise been reviewed up until now as part of the existing work program. That particular piece of work has suffered a bit of lack of momentum, for want of a better term. We've had other priorities on the books in the last, for much of this financial year. But we are now turning our minds to it. It's just that perhaps the delivery of this is going to be up to 6 months later than originally intended. The update here is framed in the sense of this plan effectiveness review does not need to cast its net so wide to look at the entirety of our regional resource management plan from cover to cover. We can be a bit more smart about what the review could or should look at, and I think of it in terms of we can look backwards, and we know that we have recently done some plan changes, such as our air quality plan change 2. We've done change 3, which is about on-site wastewater management. We've done change 5 and 6. 6 was the Tuki plan change. And on the books, we are also well aware that we need to do some improvements to our existing planning documents for land and freshwater management in the tank catchments, the Mohaka and the Wairau Nuhaka area, and so on and so forth. There are other things on our horizon as well, probably many of them not of our making, but of the central government's making in the form of new and emerging national policy statements and national environmental standards. So until some of that has a bit more flesh on the bones, I think it would be a bit premature to say, look at the effectiveness of our regional planning documents, for example, in relation to forestry activities, when we can pretty well anticipate that there is going to be a national environment standard for plantation forestry emerging in the not too distant future. So that said, looking back and looking forward, we can find hopefully a sweet spot of things within the existing regional resource management plan that we can focus our review of its effectiveness on. One suggestion that was made, or comment made at the last Regional Planning Committee meeting, was around whether or not the RRMP's effectiveness in terms of urban stormwater management should be within the scope of this particular piece of work. I'm well aware that that is certainly within the scope of the tank group in terms of the Napier and Hastings urban stormwater issues. It will be, I intend, to be within the scope of the Wairoa Nuhaka catchment group's piece of work when we come to tackle those particular catchments in due course. So if I was to make a recommendation, I don't think the issue of urban stormwater needs to be looked at in terms of the plan effectiveness review piece of work at this point in time.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, just in regard to that, your last comment, Gavin, I obviously completely disagree with you, but option 3. I'm concerned that default to the tank process is fraught with all sorts of timing and urgency issues, but that's possibly another question. My question really is, can you point to me in the current work program you've outlined there for review or potential review, I think it's section 4, it's not a rule so much, but it's a relationship between ourselves, the regional council and the local authorities in terms of the entire consenting and compliance environment. Where would I find that as a part of the review process, or is it? I think it's section 4.
Yeah, if it's the section 4 of the Regional Resource Management Plan that I'm thinking you're referring to, it's part of the non-regulatory methods that this council uses, and part of that non-regulatory package or tool box is our liaison with territorial local authorities, as much as education initiatives and financial assistance in some form or another. That's a toolbox of methods, and those tools get used in a variety of ways for a variety of resource management issues. So the work that we do with our territorial local authorities is one thing. Whether our relationship works in a generic sense is one question. I'm not too sure whether the plan effectiveness piece of work would look at it in such a global sense, or whether it would need to drop down into whether the liaison with the territorial local authorities works well in a land management sense, an odour management sense, an air discharge, hazardous substance kind of natural hazards arena. It would probably be picked up on a issue by issue basis. So, for example, is the Regional Resource Management Plan effective in how it addresses the management of natural hazards in Hawke's Bay? Part of that management response would certainly involve identification of hazards, liaison with territorial local authorities, regulatory rules for some types of hazards. So I think, to answer your question, Councillor, the liaison and the relationships with the territorial local authorities would be a piece of the puzzle when we're looking at it through an issue specific lens.
Well, we know that doesn't work, Gavin, but so what what is the solution here? We've clearly got issues in terms of our consenting and compliance, and the relationship with local authorities is encapsulated in section 4. I'm wondering why you are not recommending a review of that relationship, particularly given all of the issues, even if you take them on a whether it's drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, adopting your approach, they don't work. So there's clear evidence of that. So I'm asking the question why we wouldn't review that relationship when there's so much evidence to say what we've got doesn't work.
Councillor, can I perhaps add an observation? So we've got a whole bunch of areas in which we're working particularly well with our territorial colleagues, and I'll give the example of the coastal hazard strategy. I think the collaboration around HBRC has been it's been an effective working relationship, certainly at officer level. We have both Napier City Council and Hastings District Council intimately involved in the tank plan change. There have been some issues obviously brought to light as a consequence of the Hablett North Water Inquiry, and the joint working group and the soon-to-be established forum between the parties there is addressing the operational interface between the different organisations and how we are collectively managing the risks to drinking water. We have a stormwater working group involving both Hastings District Council and Napier City at officer level, which is constructively working through right now the options around greater regulation and alternatives to greater regulation by way of better infrastructure and investment there. So there's a lot going on that's working from a staff perspective quite well. There are certainly issues around consent compliance, and I guess it's a little bit like turning a supertanker. Some of that will relate to existing infrastructure and its ability to even meet conditions today. Some of it will relate to past consents that were issued in a planning framework which is now demonstrably out of date and is being addressed through plan revision. And I guess what Mr. Ide has been suggesting is that in each and every issue, the nature of the relationship and its strengths and weaknesses differs. And so while we could do a generic piece of work of how's it going between ourselves and the territorials, that would quickly descend down into quite a lot of specific detail on specific issues, and you'd say in some areas it's better and worse than others. And I think the territorials are an important partner, but not the only partner. And so a more holistic and outcomes-focused approach would be to go issues by issue. And so I think what Mr. Ide is suggesting is that we wouldn't be discounting at all looking at the way in which the consent relationship, the working relationship, the planning relationship with the other authorities is going, but we would be doing it issue by issue. So the concerns that you have would be addressed, but they would be addressed on an issue by issue and an outcome basis, as opposed to being very much just about the relationship overall.
Mr. Chair, if you could humour me just a little further, I'm hearing this issue by issue thing, and yet we've got an entire section in this plan, the Regional Resource Management Plan, dedicated to a generic approach across all of those issues. And yet I'm hearing the words that that does not need some sort of review, when collectively you've got a whole range of issues that are showing significant issues of discord between councils. There are some that are clearly working, but several are not. So I'm challenged to understand why we wouldn't consider the generic approach for review. What is stopping us doing that, so that we're getting clarity at a step up, a broader spectrum generic position as opposed to the specifics? I don't understand why staff are saying let's not do that.
Chair, if I could just add just a quick response to that. Look, there's no particular reason why we couldn't look at how the provisions in Section 4 of the RRMP are going. But I guess we're just making observation that in asking that question, you will quickly descend down into a series of specific topic areas where, in some cases, it goes quite well because of the nature of that area to be managed, and in other areas it's more challenging because of the nature of that area. And we are recommending to you that the better way to go is to look at those issues by issue specific, and noting that a number of them fall under the tank plan change, which is a plan performance evaluation process in of itself. And so we would be at risk of duplicating effort which is currently running, which is looking at, for example, how are we managing drinking water between the agencies, and how are we managing stormwater between the agencies, and are all of our collective arrangements delivering the outcomes the community expects. So that's simply that's our advice to you. But obviously, if we're directed otherwise, we will do as directed.
Move the report be received.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. On a completely different topic, Gavin. One of the things I noticed in there, because we've been told a couple of reports have come back about feedlots. One of the things we've been told is that the Regional Resource Management Plan perhaps hasn't got the right sort of rules in there to be able to manage feedlots effectively. Was that an issue that you'd considered being as part of the review?
Yes, it could be. Yep. But having said that, equally like stormwater, it could be an issue that the catchment-based plan changes will inevitably pick up on anyway. The only one that's the anomaly to that is the Tukituk plan change, because that has been through a process already and is now in an operative form. But what the RWSS review has revealed is that there are some challenges in implementing that PC6 as it exists at the moment. So there may or may not be another go-round on PC6. That will require some decisions of this council in terms of its work program and priorities and budgeting and what have you. But for here and now, yeah, feedlots and the effectiveness of our existing plan for managing feedlots could be within scope, can be within scope. It just runs the risk of having some duplication with the conversations already happening within the tank catchments.
Yeah, I'm comfortable. Personally, I'm comfortable if they're in the catchment by catchment thing, because I think the owners or operators of the feedlots have got a very direct message from the council in recent times as to what we're looking at from them.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to move a recommendation that the Regional Resource Management Plan Effectiveness Report includes consideration of Section 4 of the plan relating to the generic consenting and compliance relationship with local authorities.
To Councillor Curtin, my recollection of that section is that it basically is a bunch of hortatory rhetoric saying play nice, which makes me sympathetic to James's view that until you get into the nitty-gritty of, well, are we talking about a super vexing issue or a non-controversial matter, playing nice, poses different challenges. And so, and wouldn't those things be better, why wouldn't they be better addressed? I mean, so I guess what I'm asking you is what further value would you see being shed on by the generic approach?
If I could answer that, Mr. Chair, you make the very point that I'm trying to make, is that what we're hoping to achieve is an effectiveness review, that is looking at what we currently have and determining whether it's effective or not. So your very point is that that bunch of words that are used may not be effective at all and is likely not to be. So the outcome of the review could potentially be these are words that don't make any sense and we should change them. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I can't see how you can have a review that doesn't incorporate that aspect of the RRMP.
No, I was actually offering to second the motion. So
Well, thank you for seconding the motion. Well, I'm hoping the Secretary's got it, but essentially it's saying that the Section 4 of the Regional Resource Management Plan is included as a part of the effectiveness report.
I wouldn't mind, thank you, Chair.
With
respect to the motion, because Section 4 of the Regional Resource Management Plan is not essential nighttime reading for me, I'm not totally familiar with the wording, or as the context is what obviously Councillor Belford or Councillor Curtin are. But I do have a sympathy for not only Councillor Curtin's point of view, but also for Mr Palmer's point of view. So I'm going to be vexed when it comes to deciding which way I'm going to vote on this particular motion.
I was just going to.
Well, Mr Chairman, I mean, I can't recall Section 4. I think this motion is premature. If it was that a report be brought back to the next meeting of this committee in relation to the issues that Councillor Curtin raises and the seemingly contrary advice that's being offered by our senior staff, then we might all be in a position to consider this rationally. But I just think it's to put a resolution through now which basically says to Mr Palmer and his staff, sorry, I don't believe in what you're saying, and that what you're doing is not effective, is premature and pretty tough, really. So I can't support it.
Well, it's nonsense.
Chair, can I suggest as possibly a way through this, when we bring back the full scope and project plan for the review of the RRMP, the effectiveness review, that we include in there some information about Chapter 4 of the RRMP and provide an option to the Council as to whether it wants to explore this further as per the motion from Councillor Curtin.
We've got a resolution on the table, Mr Chair. And I haven't spoken to it yet, but I'd be interested too.
Well, to give Councillor Curtin the chance to sum up very shortly, Chair. I think to pick one part over the other, I get where he's coming from, but I'm not sure this is exactly the vehicle to deal with the issues that he has raised more than one occasion. And on that basis, I will struggle to support this.
Mr Chair, can I speak to the... Yes, and then I'll sum up after that. Mr Chair, if you reflect on what I've asked, it's a very simple, straightforward request. We've got a review process going on about the effectiveness of one of our plans. The staff have identified a number of areas in the plan which they intend to review and come back with various recommendations. I'm simply asking that a section of that review in relation to the consenting and compliance regime at a broad generic level needs to be also considered as a part of that review. Now that's not a hard thing to ask. I mean, we've had this nonsense that people don't understand elements of the review. Well, hang, I haven't read the whole review. I doubt whether there's anyone here else has either. There is a section I do know about, and that's, if you don't know about it, we would not review any of the thing because on that basis. So what I'm saying is a very simple ask, include it in there, and there may or may not be a recommendation or consideration coming back from staff as to its effectiveness. But I'm saying to you, and I put it, this is where the rubber hits the road, and the question about, you know, the relevance of the issues I've raised, and is this the appropriate forum? Councillor Wilson's raised that, and what I can say is this is precisely the forum that we ought to be asking that question. So if you're concerned at all about the relationship that we've had in terms of drinking water at Havelock North, clearly we had a problem. We have a problem in Central Hawke's Bay, we have a problem in Napier, and we have a problem in Wairoa. All of those are areas where we assumed from our RRMP that we had effective relationships with the consent holders, the local authorities, when clearly we didn't. So on that evidence alone, we have plenty to think about the effectiveness of that relationship. So that's my simple request, is to say, please include it as a part of your effectiveness review. It may be revealing, it may be not.
Just very briefly, Chair, I think it's pretty hard to argue with what Councillor Curtin is proposing here. We know we've had some not insignificant issues with managing resource consents, which is our responsibility, and to review how that happens and what our relationship with the TLAs is an absolutely sensible part of what we're doing here.
Councillor Curtin has raised this kind of issue. I mean, for the benefit of the whole group here, this has been an ongoing issue of concern to Councillor Curtin. He's expressed it very succinctly here in the last couple of minutes that there are all these occasions. James listed a variety of them as well, where there's been a lot of concern about how we relate, particularly in our monitoring and compliance and so forth areas, consenting with our territorial neighbors. And it does seem like there is a lot that has not worked very well in the public interest lately. And I guess I would share the view that does require some kind of holistic examination of how that all can be improved, whether by process or structure or whatever. I think this is kind of an awkward way into the issue as to whether a paragraph in the Regional Resource Management Plan is the answer to the issue. And I'm sure the councillor agrees with me that it's a much more complex issue than would be fixed by rewriting a paragraph or two of this plan. But if this is the only way to sort of trigger that broader review, then I would be inclined to support it. I mean, it does get into the nitty-gritty of all these different issues of contention. They all have their own buried bodies and histories and so forth associated with them, and archaic planning rules of the day, and they're all different situations really, but somehow we do have to, I think, get our arms around the whole relationship issue. And if this is the backdoor way to get at it, then fine. What's the harm?
So happy to remove the report, Chair.
Myrtle Rust
for the next meeting. Look, absolutely, the biosecurity team are engaged with the Ministry for Primary Industries on the myrtle rust risk issue at the moment, so we'll get a briefing for the next meeting.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair. The Hearings Committee had a meeting yesterday and discussed its terms of reference. And the terms of reference allows one member to be appointed from the Regional Planning Committee and one member from the Maori Committee, and neither of those appointments has yet been made. So I'd just like to bring it to your attention that you need to nominate somebody for the Hearings Committee. That was the first thing. The second thing was that you all received a notice regarding a workshop that we were having on the resource consent process. And it was just an unfortunate piece of timing that no one was able to get to it. So because it's actually a really helpful piece of work and it's actually been very well prepared by staff, and we think it's of significant value, we'd like to bring it forward and put it on the agenda for the next Mana Whenua RPC workshop next month, and make sure that we've got a set time so that everybody can attend it, and we can also invite members of the Maori Committee and other councillors to that session. And it's probably going to take about up to an hour, I'm guessing, 3/4 of an hour to an hour.
Move us into public excluded, Chair. Move.